Welcome to our event today here in New York City on how gender equality cheats women and girls. And we have a great panel. We're going to be speaking in the order of which we're seated. And I will open with my remarks, and then I'll be followed by Beth Stelzer, who's with Save Women's Sports, the famous Posey Parker, aka Kelly J. Keene, and then Natasha Chart, followed by Libby Emmons. And then after we all have our opening remarks, at that point, I will collect up your cards and we'll sift through them. And hopefully if you have a question that's for a specific speaker, make that known on your card, versus if you just have a general question that anybody could answer. So because it's my party, I'm going to start. And my remarks, the title is "We're Women Until We Are Not." As people from all around the world are gathering this week in New York City at the United Nations for the annual Commission on the Status of Women, or gathering out front to make noise, the UN's theme this year is focused on achieving gender equality and empowerment of women and girls in a variety of settings. I think it's especially important that we gather here today to show how a widely embraced flawed understanding of gender equality, in fact, cheats women and girls. My remarks today, before allowing my colleagues to speak, will focus on the body of my work over the last 20 years, which involves reproductive medicine and reproductive technology. Until recently, it was universally accepted that there are two sexes, male and female. And any deviation from male or female binary were just variations of maleness or femaleness. That's the science, that's the human biology. And the two-sex distinction was based on our chromosomes, XX and XY, and our reproductive capacity. Male means you have a penis, you have testicles, you produce sperm. Female means you have a vagina, you have ovaries, you have a uterus, you produce eggs. These two sexes together have the capacity to reproduce. An inability to reproduce does not take away from your maleness or femaleness. An inability to reproduce is what is known as infertility. But now we've been arbitrarily told almost overnight that the very definition of the words man and woman are not at all linked to sex, but rather to an individual's subjective sense of gender. Womanhood has been reduced to a feeling and a set of sex role stereotypes. The news flash, we're told, is that men can now be women and women can be men. And in this global rebrand, actual women are being erased, harmed, and exploited. We are no longer women or mothers, we are birthing people, since men, we're told, can now have babies. Breastfeeding has been swapped out with chest feeding to accommodate men having babies. Although the lifetime risk of a woman being diagnosed with breast cancer is 1 in 8, compared to a man's risk, which is 1 in 833. Midwives report that just by doing their job, they are banned from using the word woman or mother, even when helping women give birth to become mothers. One question that was raised at a conference I recently attended, where an attendee asked a speaker to talk about moving beyond these male-female binaries, because men who are pretending to be women, my words, are uncomfortable talking about their sperm. The speaker agreed that we need to move beyond speaking about male sperm and female eggs, and then she went on and commented that a trans female patient who had banked his sperm before affirmation surgeries was uncomfortable with the word sperm because it's such a gendered word. But here's the thing, we're women until we're not. The powers that be have determined that when it's convenient to use the term woman or female or man or male, we can make that biological distinction. But until it becomes politically or ideologically driven to erase, cheat, and exploit or marginalize women, then we can't. Big Pharma and their proponents first invest millions in peddling the notion that biological sex is arbitrary or irrelevant, and then they rake in millions by targeting people specifically by their sex. Cases in point. Merck is now enrolling women in a new clinical trial for a new treatment protocol for cervical cancer. In order to be eligible to participate in this new clinical trial, you must have cervical cancer, and you must be a woman. This study began in 2020 and is scheduled to complete in 2024. UC San Diego, where I live in California, has an active clinical trial right now for a new treatment protocol for advanced cervical and vaginal cancer. And you must be eligible, you must be female to be eligible to enroll. Conversely, Pfizer is running a clinical trial on a new drug treatment for prostate cancer, which their own website states is the #2 cancer affecting men after skin cancer. Turning toward fertility medicine and treatments involving egg and sperm sellers, they're not usually donors, and surrogacy, the advertising and marketing clearly is sex-based. Fertility tycoons don't have any trouble discerning which people to target. One agency promotes their egg donation program by saying that prospective donors have to have regular menstrual cycles and ovaries. Another agency lists their requirements for potential sperm sellers. They say, let's begin with the basics. First, obviously, you must be male. Then they go on to describe how a semen sample will be professionally analyzed for the sperm count, the motility, the morphology, which all indicates the health of the sperm. Surrogacy requirements of most agencies state that the women must have healthy reproductive histories and have given birth to at least one child without complications. So good, proper medicine, medical breakthroughs, advances in science require that we are male and female all the time, not just when it's politically motivated or ideologically expedient. These sorts of ideas which deny the maleness and femaleness are not only a detriment to our health and well-being, but for future generations yet to be born. Let's forget about using pronouns and get back to the basics of science and human biology. Thank you.
Okay, how are y'all doing today? Good. It's awesome to see you all. Thank you for coming out. Thank you to my fellow panelists, and thank you to Jennifer for giving us this opportunity to shine a light on the atrocities of what we know as the gender identity industry. It's truly an honor for me to be here on this panel today. Just a few years ago, I came here on one of my first solo trips ever, big city, New York City, and listened to Kelly J and Libby on a panel. And joining them here today is really special to me. On that trip, they really lit a fire in me and left me feeling so strong and empowered, and that's what I want you to feel, and that's why I agreed to come today. A brief intro for those who don't know my work. I started Save Women's Sports after my first powerlifting competition. The 2019 Women's State Championships, where a male protested the entire event because he was not allowed to compete. You could say this is when I peaked. I fell down the rabbit hole of the erasure of women, and when I finally got my bearings back, I started a free website, SaveWomenSports.com. It's celebrating 3-year anniversary this month, and in those 3 years, we have grown into an international coalition with laws in our namesake to protect female athletes. Last year, we had over 40 states introduce bills, 9 became laws, and this year, states are moving fast to join. With Biden administration erasing Title IX last year around this time on International Women's Day with the inclusion of gender identity, we have slowed our attempts at the national level and are concentrating at the state level. But on the international level, we are working to draw attention to the wrongdoings of the International Olympic Committee, the IOC. They recently removed restrictions for males to compete as females, and now relying on other organizations to make the rules. They basically pass the buck, just like our NCAA has done to our college girls. I often refer to sports as the tip of the iceberg. It's what everyone can see, right? It's obvious. It's a common sense issue. It's so much underneath, though, that is going to sink our ship of our rights. And we need to raise the alarm now before it is too late. We have a record of over 100 males, that's no way comprehensive, that have competed and took titles away from females. And that number rises daily and is rising at a faster rate. more and more. We have no idea, really, how many women have been forced to accept males on their playing field, in their locker rooms, but we do know one thing, don't we, women? One is too many. Just recently, a male swimmer broke the Ivy League championship record and a Harvard pool record for swimming the women's 100 freestyle. He's going to be swimming tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday at the NCAA Women's Championships in Atlanta. He's ranked #1 in the nation for 2 of those events, and the other race is the one he just broke records in. Rest assured, my amazing team of women, some of you are out there, will not let that go down quietly. We've seen the suffering of girls like Selena, Chelsea, Alana, Ashley in Connecticut who had to race against just 2 males who took 15 state titles away. There's Idaho where young women had to face off against males at the college level in track. And their state's even currently being sued for passing a law to protect female athletes. There's a story of Cynthia and her daughter in Hawaii, mom a champion runner, daughter multi-sport athlete, both have had to face competing against males. I have friends who have been kicked off their roller derby team for being gender critical. I know athletes who have been threatened with the removal of their sponsorships if they don't quit standing up for women. And it's not just athletes that are feeling this pressure and are under attack and afraid to speak up. We get messages from coaches, parents, administration, policymakers, legislators, officials. Often these messages lead me to wearing another hat, a makeshift therapist, and ending with everyone in tears. How else do we deal with this, you know? But we're here today to talk, and today's title of the panel is How Gender Equality Harms Women and Girls. So today, I'd like to shine a light on how this has harmed me. I've spent countless hours, sometimes 16 hours or more a day, building that website, doing interviews, traveling the country, making new connections. There was a time in Texas I spent almost the whole day registering at 7 a.m., leaving at 6 a.m., just to wait my turn to testify for 2 minutes. Wow. While I love my gray hair, there's a lot more there than there was last year. I haven't been able to keep up with my powerlifting routine. My family suffered from harassment and our relationship is strained. My health has suffered from the stress. I received gruesome death threats. I'm currently in a legal situation wrapped up involving discrimination. If this can happen to me, it can happen to you, but you cannot let that stop you. You cannot let that hold you back from doing what is right. The suffering that women like me have had to go through to get to where we are often goes unacknowledged. Often we try to shelter other activists from our hardships. And you know, I'm not looking for a pity party today. I made my choices. What I'm looking to do is to shine a light on the work it takes to get things done. To make actual progress. What I have been through though is nothing compared to the suffragettes who went through hunger strikes, losing their children, families, jobs, even beat to death. For us to be here, let us not forget them, and let us not forget we are in this together. And now is the time for us to step up and speak out against the absurdity that is the gender industry. Magdalene Burns reminded us that we do not all have to agree on everything to come together to achieve a common goal. May she rest in peace, knowing we are here together, putting our differences aside to fight this. Yes. I hear an echo from our sisters across the sea. I hear it, a call to action. Do you hear it? Deeds, not words. Thank you all for being here today. I hope you can join us tomorrow on the Save Women's Sports live stream. We have an amazing, very special surprise for you. We're going to be making some waves, so thank you all. Keep making your own waves. We are the revolution.
Okay, good afternoon. Well, I was privileged to witness the incredible rise of Beth, who is an ordinary mom, and I'm really privileged to watch her stratospheric journey into greatness. To the peddlers of transgender ideology, to the men who speak wearing womanhood as a costume, to the people in power who delight in drowning in diversity and inclusion, who believe they escape offering citizens real change, that put food in the bellies and security in the futures for their children, to the women who call themselves liberal feminists, who see themselves as kind, to the XX misogynists. These are some of the things that are not yours to give away. Woman, women, mother, mum, girls, daughter. These are not your words to give away. These mean something to each and every one of us. Those of us privileged enough to have daughters, we watch their struggles through teenage years. It's not a mistake. It happens globally. It is a developmental necessity, unfortunately for girls, that means when they reach puberty, they pull away from their parents, they become insanely embarrassed, and they also want to please their peers. Can you imagine teenage girls right now? You're embarrassed by your body. You're already embarrassed by your body, but you want to fit in with your friends, and what your friends are telling you is that that boy is welcome in your space and that man really is a woman. How the hell do you escape? How the hell do you escape that? Well, maybe you could be a nice example of somebody training to be a porn star, because that seems to be the offering that we give young girls in 2022. I was commenting when I was outside the White House, and there were 3 girls having their picture taken. They were young women. They were probably about 16 or 17. And they were so well groomed. Every single inch of hair on their head was, and I realise I talk as somewhat a hypocrite, but I'm 47. I've earned the right to be vain. And if I don't tidy each and every single hair and dollop loads of makeup, I'm not coming out. But for young women, it's not a choice. Whereas, like, when I was growing up, we had different sorts of music. You had grunge, you could identify in music something that you liked that pulled you together with a range of different people. That is not something that girls can do. So, to those people, the peddlers of transgender ideology, those words are not yours to give away. They are also not your words to dilute. There is no other thing on earth besides an adult human female that is a woman. We are not cervix havers, we are not menstruators, we are not birthing people, we are not chest feeders. We are women, and by God, I love being a woman. I love the fact that when Beth talks, I feel like I could weep at the same time as feeling extraordinarily proud to know her. And I think that's because I am a woman and my compassion overflows, which is why sometimes some of these women are too willing to give our rights away. It must be maintained that when we are compassionate, that we are compassionate first and foremost for women, because nobody else is. Nobody else. There is not a man on this planet that genuinely understands the fear of being alone and hearing a man's voice. There is not a single man that understands that, and they may speak for us, and in the UK, many women defer to these men, but they have no idea really what's at stake. Now, to those peddlers of transgender ideology, these spaces are not yours to give away. Our toilets, our private spaces, the places we undress, our hospitals, our single-sex wards, they are not ours to give away. We didn't fight for them, but we will have to fight to keep them. When it comes to sports, I don't know that I could possibly add anything that would make any difference to anybody. But to the peddlers of transgender ideology, they are not your sports to give away. When it comes to our children in schools, being indoctrinated into this absolutely obscene, nonsensical, quasi-religious, dogmatic pile of rubbish. We are basically stealing their minds. We are stealing their minds. We are not allowing them anymore. There will be a time in which small children will not understand that a woman is an adult human female, that their fear of a man in their space is genuinely a true fear. Please fear them in your space, children, because no man who isn't a predator imposes himself into a woman's space.
Amen.
Keep track of time. So, to the peddlers of transgender ideology, when it comes to our children, when it comes to how they can think straight, these are not your minds to give away. These are not your rights to give away. The right for women to self-organize, the right for us to be able to speak, the right for us to be able to expect that somebody in power will speak for us and mean us.
No, we have to speak for ourselves.
Well, we can speak for ourselves, but I ain't the President of the United States, and he seems to be able to sign an executive order that will take your rights away. So until I do become, I understand it's impossible, but until maybe one of the women on this panel becomes the President of the United States, then they do have your rights. They can give them away, and yet they have never earned them.
That's right. That's right.
When it comes to children, and I'm going to really plow through this, so because I always cry. When it comes to parents who have witnessed their children getting sucked into this cult, and their teachers and the doctors and the counsellors pull those children in, for what reason, I have no idea. I don't know what they get from it, but I don't believe it's anything but evil.
Yes.
When I watch the parents' grief, and it's palpable, I literally just feel my heart ache when they have to witness their children disappearing. They have to live through the grief of watching a child that they know, that they love, that they adore, become someone that they no longer really recognize. And the doctors just allow it, take it, celebrate it, go on TikTok, sell it. They are not their bodies to give away.
No.
They are our bodies to defend, and Jesus, I will do it until I cannot draw breath. Hold the line. In this room, there are many of us, and there are so many more that have no idea what's going on, that are willing just to give away the futures of each and every one of us to the sort of morons that are outside protesting today, who don't understand the link between mammals and humans. They don't seem to understand that we are mammals, like we are instinctively mammals. We love our children, we care for each other, we look after each other because evolutionary, it serves our purpose, right? If we are together in a unit, then we are much safer and we are much more likely to survive. And I'd like to say finally to the peddlers of transgender ideology, to the men who speak wearing womanhood as a costume, to the people in power who delight in drowning in diversity and inclusion, who believe they escape offering citizens real change, that put food in their bellies and security for their children, to the women who call themselves liberal feminists, who see themselves as kind, to the XX misogynists, these are some of the things that are not yours to give away, and ultimately, these are not your futures to give away. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natasha Chart, and
Oh my God.
don't know why it's doing this. Oh no, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I was just about to say that I'm a bit of a low talker, so this might be coming after the two of you. I really feel that as a defect in this moment. But anyway.
That's not me. That's not me.
No, it's just the curse. So thanks everyone for coming, and to Jennifer for inviting us here. I'm here to talk about the capture of our political institutions and the consequences of that. In 2013, I was living in Washington, D.C. and working at an organization called Progressive Congress. They're a foundation that works with the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and our office was near the Capitol. I commuted there on the Metro. I managed their digital campaigns, and I counted myself very lucky to have that job, not just because the pay was good, though it was. I was working with a woman who was a social media training consultant, with a campaigner from Move On, which if you're in progressive politics, everybody knows Move On, they're huge, and a veteran of field campaigns from all over the country who'd had a prominent role at Democracy for America, a respected progressive campaign group that emerged from the Howard Dean campaign for president. I'd been one of the early Netroots bloggers that had been invited to tour for a day on the Dean campaign plane in 2004, and I got a press pass to the 2004 Democratic National Convention on the basis of my political writing and activism. I was a returning college student, and when I finished college, I ended up in DC. I started down a path of getting real work in politics. I learned political email campaigning with some of the pioneers in the field while working at the Service Employees International Union, or the SEIU. If you watch political demonstrations or campaigns or presidential rallies, there's always a people there in the purple shirts. SEIU. Those were my people. And in 2013, having worked my way up from writing a tiny blog to getting a job at a place like that with such respected professionals, I should have been elated, but I was just exhausted. It wasn't the job, I was pregnant. And being pregnant, which can only happen to women, is exhausting because your body is doing the equivalent of running a marathon every day. I've never been athletic. I respect the sports, but it's not me, and I was not prepared. Right around the day that I almost fell asleep while standing up on a crowded metro commute home, I decided to look for a new job with less of a commute. I found one with an all-virtual office organization at a web publication called RH Reality Check, now known as Rewire. They focused on feminist causes, and especially on reproductive health. I was hired as the director of campaigns and fundraising and built their email list to around 200,000 people. I was known a little bit in progressive politics, because it's a small industry, but mainly for being argumentative, which will surprise no one. But that experience was enough over the years that I do know politics as an industry, and have met and talked to people at every level, from grassroots volunteer activists all the way up to presidential candidates and the people who run local and national political campaigns. I've talked with and gotten to know people at all kinds of political nonprofits and listened to them about their work. And that was a long wind-up to say that when I was fired in 2015 over opposing gender identity and my employer's support for the sex trade, I was shocked. I hadn't worked in LGBT politics because I never got the impression that a bisexual woman would be very welcome in it, and I had other interests, such as environmentalism and women's rights. So what I didn't know at the time was that LGBT politics had already been taken over by straight men insisting that they were lesbians. After the marriage fight had been won, it seemed like the gay men handed the movement over to the first lesbians they ever met that they liked, straight men who identified as women. So I was present for the takeover of the feminist movement in the US by gender activists. I didn't know that since Barney Frank had tangled with gender activists in 2007, he was a pioneering gay congressman. I think he was the first out gay person in Congress. He had blocked them from adding gender identity to ENDA because he was worried about the possibility of men ending up in women's showers, and he warned his colleagues about that all the way back in 2007. But the battle in that policy space had at that time been won completely by Frank's opponents, who pushed him out. But politics is about everything that people do and you can't follow every single issue, so it's easy to miss things like that if you aren't right there in the space. Very few people could likely have guessed what was going to happen next. In about 2014, I remember having a conversation with a communications staffer at a large national women's organization, telling her that I'd begun to notice that conversations on feminist Twitter reminded me a lot of growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. I was surprised to feel that as an adult feminist, I was once again worried that I might get disfellowshipped, which I was when I was 17. The witness version of shunning for disagreeing with people. I told someone I knew at another women's organization that I was getting that disfellowshipping vibe on the issue of saying anything wrong about trans issues. She replied that her boss laughed every time the subject of so-called trans women came up and just waved it away. 2014. In 2015, I got fired for saying that straight men can't be lesbians. Later that year, the head of that other organization had her name on a letter with signatures from dozens of other women's organizations in support of the Obama administration's policy on ending single-sex accommodations for women, like bathrooms and emergency shelters. Before I was fired, I argued about the topic of gender identity on what had seemed to be a fairly freewheeling list for progressive female nonprofit staff, political staffers, and writers. We talked about a wide variety of the issues of the day. I and a couple other women who were willing to stick their heads above the parapet brought up the prison issue, indecent exposure, letting men in women's shelters, and how it affected lesbians. Not long after I was fired, I found out that New York's governor, Andrew Cuomo, I'd moved to New York State by then, I heard he was going to pass a sweeping gender identity law. I sent information to state representatives and got no responses. I knew someone who worked in the governor's office and sent him information about things like the man who sexually assaulted women in Canadian shelters and the wife murderer in Massachusetts who wanted to get surgery and move into the women's prison. My friend called me back a few hours later. He wasn't happy. He said I could have gotten him fired. He said the women in the office laughed at him for bringing them turf stuff. So that was 2015. I can't emphasize how fast the changeover happened after the Obama administration began to put their feet down to say that this was the way forward and the only way forward. Obama demonstrated early in his tenure, before he even took office in 2008, that any nonprofit that came out against his policies was going to have the president's people contacting their major donors and convincing them to pull their funding. And I worked at the time at a nonprofit who lost major donors for this reason, so I had a lot of reason to know that. People in Democratic politics got the message early: don't pick fights with the president. Later, I read that a senior member of the Pritzker family of Illinois, now known as Jennifer Pritzker, had transitioned in 2013 and had started funding gender identity politics. The Pritzker family of the Hyatt hotel chain were Obama's political mentors. Penny Pritzker served as a Secretary of Commerce in the Obama administration. So that's how they're connected. And that all happened a while ago now. But if you knew the kind of people that I knew then, you knew that the battle for the professional class that supports the Democratic Party in the US and all of their allied nonprofits was over. The battle for the donor class was over. And anyone who objected would be fired, just like me. I became a cautionary tale, and I had reliable information that my situation had been quite widely discussed. In 2020, it became clear during the presidential primary that even Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, sitting senators, would be made to apologize for once opposing putting men in women's prison, demanding cosmetic sex surgery. That was the public culmination of an industry takeover years in the making. Now we have a wealthy president whose private family foundation supports gender identity and whose work since his very first day in office has been to erase recognition of sex from federal law and policy. People in the left sector of the US political industry have jobs to the extent that they can convince everyone around them that they truly believe men can be women just by saying so. They are, in my estimation, very likely a lost cause until they come to some kind of crushing public defeat under the banner of gender ideology. And enough of the public is organized to understand and oppose the depths of depravity of this denial of reality. In personal terms, here's how I think of this. I'm an autistic woman who was once a very lonely autistic girl with unusual interests for a girl. I loved dinosaurs and archaeology and science fiction. I was called Rain Man by my peers at church because I read a lot of books and I remembered things in them. So weird. I ended up I ended up hanging out with the nerds and the geeks at school, with the metalheads and later the goth kids. I hated being a girl because I felt like I was forever being told I couldn't do things. I hated it when at puberty my body started getting what I thought of at the time as lumpy, fat, and sore. I mean, we've all been there, right? I loathed my periods, which were long and miserable. Every year we don't stop this. How many hundreds or thousands of young girls like me, like some of you, all the other girls who hate their bodies getting lumpy and sore, how many of them are going to leap at the chance to have their newly lumpy chests flattened out again by mastectomies before they stop being sore? How many of them are going to leap at the chance to have their annoying periods magicked away by hysterectomy without realizing what it means to go on menopause in your teens and the huge impact that has on cardiovascular health? It can take decades off your life to go into early menopause. How many autistic girls are going to get sexually maimed before my former colleagues come to their senses? How long before they realize that when they were driving up the ratings for the reality show I Am Jazz, they were supporting the sterilization of a same-sex attracted boy for public entertainment, for their entertainment? I'm a domestic violence survivor, and as a bisexual woman, I know that we are the likeliest by orientation to end up in violent relationships. I endured years of coercive control before it turned violent. And I was lucky to get away with what I think of as easy, because he didn't leave any marks on me, and we didn't have any children together. A lot of women who face the childhood and relationship abuse I endured end up in jail or prison after their lives descend into spirals of desperate crimes or prostitution. How many men who are so violent that the state put them in jail for raping, battering, or murdering women are my former colleagues going to admit to women's shelters and prisons to stay with the other women who were never able to get themselves free? Most of the women in prison are abuse victims. Everyone knows that. Now, thanks to my former colleagues, their prison sentences are ever more likely to include further torture and intimidation by men sharing their rooms and showers. My former colleagues have a lot to answer for. I know them well enough to know they mean well, but they're committing unforgivable crimes against humanity. Every day I hope they will decide that there have been enough victims sacrificed for the sakes of their careers to protect them from getting yelled at on Twitter by unhinged gamers, that they will reconsider their actions. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I'm in awe of you for women. I'm really, I'm so glad to be here with you and to hear what you have to say. I wanted to talk a little bit about culture and feminism and education. I feel fully that we've eradicated the soul and replaced it with gender. We've destroyed individuality and replaced it with identity. Teachers have been replaced with activists. Education is now indoctrination.
Yes.
And our kids are left with gaping holes in their knowledge, academics, self-awareness, and cultural understanding.
Yes.
Having been thoroughly infiltrated by ideas that compassion means facilitating delusions, the educational system in the United States has turned itself inside out to now believe that the job of educators is to make sure children as young as 5 know about divergent sexual practices and lifestyles, adult sexual fetishes, and how to choose their own pronouns. Children are being told that the very basics of reality are optional. Why do kindergartners need to know about gender identity? In most cases, children who are 5 or 6 don't know what sex is. At best, they've had cursory mentions of it from parents who want to make sure kids have at least some information before they hear it from others, or have talked about it before, or have talked about it after being asked where babies come from. But they don't know specifics. They don't know about romantic love and sexual relationships. They only know about the mechanics, and even that is a bit vague. Yet we've all seen the countless videos of educators talking about facilitating conversations with children about whether or not they really are a boy or a girl. encouraging kids to use alternate pronouns for each other, as well as teachers coming out to students by explaining their own pronouns and demanding little kids use them, and still other teachers speaking with pride about how they help their students keep gender identity secrets from their parents. Some schools, through the charity The Transition Closet, are providing even dangerous chest binders to girls. Despite endless concerns over bullying, we are in a culture that praises kids for coming out, that treats impulses toward family and marriage as backwards, and pushes children into sex and sexual lifestyles without any consideration of love, commitment, or reproductive responsibility. In many ways, the rites of passage that used to exist in our culture, whether they were religious, like bar mitzvahs or confirmations, or even cultural ones like Sweet 16 or Quinceañera, wherein children would be ushered into adulthood in their communities, have been replaced by the concept of coming out. It's no coincidence that the youngest age most surgeons will operate on for breast removal or prescribed cross-sex hormones is 12 or 13 years old, which is, of course, that's confirmation year, that's bar mitzvah year. This is the pivotal moment in which a child seriously begins the move from childhood to adulthood. Now when they seek to stand out, to make that claim of growing up, one of the most celebrated ways to do it is to state a sexual orientation or to decide to be trans. It allows for a new language to describe oneself and new clothing options. It's a way to say, I am not the child I was, but this new being who can make decisions for herself. And so we have arrived at a moment in which we routinely tell children that their bodies are lies and their fantasies are true. Feminists made up a story about men and women that sounded like it would help. That women are not feminine, that being feminine is not the purview of women. It sounded like it would help women feel less trapped in their roles as women, as mothers, daughters, and wives. And they were trapped. When I was 16, I found my mom's copy of Sisterhood is Powerful. I read about a woman, a New York sculptor in the 1960s who was married and a mom, and after she got the kids to bed in their little downtown apartment, she would take out her clay and start working at the kitchen table. Then her husband would come home with his friends, just as she was hitting her stride. They'd have been at the bar and would want her to feed them all. She would put off the work. I read about a woman in the civil rights movement who was bold and determined, only to find herself told to make coffee while the men talked seriously. I read the memoir of Amiri Baraka's first wife back when he was Leroy Jones. Hetty Jones, a Jewish woman in New York, bore him 2 children, only for him to get woke and leave her for an activist artist lifestyle and a younger woman. Hetty became an education activist because she was determined to get a good education for her kids. My brilliant grandmother, Ann Savino, graduated from Hunter College early and went on to teach public school in Brownsville, Brooklyn in the 1940s. She was close to tenure when she found out she was pregnant and had to leave teaching. She never went back to it and went on instead to have 3 daughters. She was an avid reader who could always beat me in Scrabble or Jeopardy, whose husband left before I can remember in the 1970s. My father's mother was a dressmaker who sewed clothes for her 4 children and found herself looking for secretarial work after my grandfather left her at about the same time. Trapped. And these are only a few. There's Tilly Olson, the American writer who wanted to write more than anything, but had to wait until her children were grown and off the farm before she had a chance. Her fiction was what could be expected after a lifetime of imagining and not practicing the form. Being a caregiver is a lot, as virtually every woman knows. You give over yourself, your labor, your mind, your hands, your body for the comfort of another. At its best, it brings an unmistakable joy and contentment, pleasure in having done well for another. At its worst, well, you're trapped. You know the feeling, ladies, women, females, uterus havers, bleeders, of wanting to break out of the thing holding you, that role, that uniquely and specifically and unequivocally feminine role in which you have found yourself. And so recognizing this universal, for menstruators, make clear that something must be done, an escape hatch found, or perhaps carved out of the flesh of humanity itself. It was gender, and we carved it out of our bodies. We carved it out of our minds. We split ourselves, body from gender, in much the same way that people imagine the soul and body being sundered at the point of death, and this split was a death of sorts. The feminine has been rent from the female. We can now hold separate in our minds the 2 things, the female and the feminine. We can imagine the female without the feminine. It has all the feels of profundity, but it isn't profound. It was simply a spit valve, an exit hatch, a way to demand the right to freedom by admitting that the thing from which we wanted to be freed was worthy of being oppressed. But to say that we women are not the thing that is worthy of oppression, we are merely women, that gender, well, has nothing to do with us. That feminine gender, we said to the patriarchy, the feminine, the caregiver, the mother, the daughter, the wife, that's your thing, and it's weak, it's laughable, it's contemptible, and it's not us. We are this other thing. We are women, and we are a blank slate. This was meant to give us freedom, but it has instead trapped us in something else. Now we are not perceived as the thing that identified us, our gender, and we are not perceived as the thing that we are identified by, our bodies. The feminist movement is essentially an Icarus, and now it's destroying our children, our families, and our legal protections. What we idealized as a means of liberation for women was in many ways a liberation for men. The concept of the single mom is now praised as some kind of brave achievement, leaving men off the hook for fatherhood. Women working straight jobs is now the norm instead of being the exception to the stay-at-home mom standard, leaving men off the hook for being breadwinners. Birth control and abortion keep women sexually available without the consequences of human reproduction, and it's the women who pay the price for that with their own bodies. Now our daughters and little sisters are paying that price too, and they're presenting with new kinds of scars. Divorced from a gender that feminists told us was weak, contemptible, rightfully oppressible, girls found that they had no reason to embrace it. The feminine is so many things that smart girls hate. It's puke pink. It has bows on it. It comes with being ogled and needing to buy tampons. It comes with words like budding breasts and Aunt Flo and people telling you to try not to get raped. Lots of it really sucks, which the feminists knew, which is why we didn't want it anymore. But men who we long to believe had created femininity just to oppress us found the feminine gender lying around and claimed it for their own. While we hated it, it was something they idealized. Now, instead of simply defining it and demanding women live by that definition, they are embracing it, wearing it like a second skin, like a dead animal hide, and claiming that because they have done so, the definition of women must include them too. And now women are trapped again, and it's again by a definition we didn't create for ourselves. We wanted our liberation, we wanted to be free from the feminine gender, and so we had to be willing to give it away as easily as we chucked it off in the first place, but it hasn't been liberating. Girls believe they can choose to not be female simply by rejecting the traditional norms of femininity. The problem with femininity, as described by traditional sex-based roles, was not what femininity was, but that we hated it. Was the problem. We women thought less of ourselves for being feminine. We thought less of the feminine tasks, and we looked down upon ourselves for not having male characteristics. This we have passed on to our girl children, who, when they make that fateful realization that they are no longer the child they were, decide fully that they don't want to be the woman they will become either. We do our girls a disservice when we lie to them and tell them they don't have to be women. We harm them when we usher them into a world of adult sexuality with no reproductive consequences, without love, and in the case of genital mutilation surgery, one that even lacks the potential for sexual pleasure. We tell them they can be anything they want to be, but we have forgotten to tell them to love being who they are, to embrace those aspects of femininity, that are unique to women alone, and to live as their authentic female selves without any concern or regard for male definitions of who and what we are. Yes. Thank you.